Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet. Turbulent planet wrapped in a pandemic still unfolding with rising rates of disease in some of the biggest countries in the world, India particularly, the United States still scrambling to figure things out. And today is a day we'll all remember for a long time. Those of us who were alive then and those of us who were considering this as history, 9/11, September 11th was 2001 was a horrible moment in the history of humanity, and we've found ways forward. It's been a terrible, costly process of figuring out how to limit terrorism without limiting freedom and without pushing a lot of wrong buttons. The politics of this has all been very troubling, but the losses that day are to be remembered always. I took this picture last year down there on this anniversary down in Lower Manhattan. I haven't been there this year for obvious reasons. I'm really pleased to be here this morning with an evening. What time is it in Myanmar, Paul?
7:30 in the evening. Yeah.
7:30 in the evening, Myanmar time, and here on the East Coast of the United States, 9 a.m. Wherever you are, I hope you can share the link you're watching on as we converse about journalism and the state of the planet right now, and particularly the merits of slowing down. I just posted on Twitter this morning a big study came out yesterday on it's a new 60 million year history of Earth's climate. That's with remarkable new details putting our current climate predicament in long-term context. And normally it would be in the New York Times and the Post and elsewhere. And I was kind of gently saying, now that these papers have 5 or 6 times more people covering climate change, someone should break away to look at the long picture too. Not just, we are immersed in fire and troubles right now, but the big picture matters too. You can't really capture how to behave if you're just looking at the now. And Paul Salopek has figured this out. He had been a masterful and much lauded print journalist for newspapers, the Chicago Tribune, had written for National Geographic both before that and since. And now he's in the middle of the ultimate long assignment, which was an assignment of his own making, walking the planet, essentially following the course of Homo sapiens history from North Africa through Asia, and eventually, well, we'll find out more about the long-term goal, but it's 20,000 mile or so adventure. And you're about, let's see, where are you on the mileage clock right now?
Yeah, probably more or less approaching the halfway mark. So more or less at the fulcrum point.
And you started in 2013?
That's right. That's right. So probably have another 6 years to go.
And how old are you now?
I am 58.
You're a youngster.
Keep
on walking. The walking must keep you in good shape.
Genes, I think, my hillbilly ancestors, yes.
So I thought we'd start with a little bit of your backstory. In other words, what got you into journalism? Well, actually, let's back up to 9/11. Just as a little, you said you told me a minute ago you were in Soweto that day.
Yeah, I was the bureau chief for the Johannesburg bureau of the Chicago Tribune, and I was out doing a story about music in Soweto, the big township outside of that city, when I got a call that day from an editor saying, "Can you get on a plane to Saudi Arabia?"
Wow.
So that was my memory, yeah.
And were you able to go?
I was, yeah. I was one of the first people into Saudi, believe it or not.
Wow.
They made a mistake. They thought I was South African somehow, and they let me in.
Wow. If I had time, I'd click back to some of the coverage you must have done at the time. And you won one of your 2 Pulitzer Prizes for your Africa coverage.
That's right. Yeah, it was, I think, kind of a compendium of work. Much of it focused around the civil war in Congo.
Right. Which is still such a troubled part of the planet.
Yeah, sadly. It's, Africa's in much better condition now than it was when I was an active reporter there. So I'm an Afro-optimist. But yeah, it still has its issues. Yeah.
That's a very tweetable label. I'm an Afro-optimist.
Mm-hmm.
I have not spent nearly as much time there, just fractions of time, but I feel the same way. It's the people, I assume, that give you that sense of optimism.
That and also where they stand in this kind of the tide of history right now. I mean, technologically, they're able to bypass a lot of the mistakes that we made. with older technologies and leap directly into a digital mode without spending so much money on things like copper wiring and whatnot. So, yeah, I think Africa is a comer, in my opinion.
And certainly the resources are there. They're still saddled with this geography, structural history, much of which was imposed on that continent by Europe, and that's creates trouble. But
no, and they're subject to big forces, powerful forces outside. The characters change, but the similar forces seeking those resources.
China.
Yep. But they're doing, again, I don't know how much you want to get into Africa. I could talk a lot. It's been a while since I was there, but they're doing, when I was there, Andy, the worst year I was there for 9 years, a long time. I kept re-upping because I loved it so much. The worst year there were 16 wars going on in Africa, and that was part of the beat, right? I mean, if you're gonna, not that you want to focus on the negative things, but if you're going to be intellectually honest, that is a big part of what life was like in that part of the world. But now it's just much less. And so, I mean, there is progress.
Right. Well, that gets at what we were just starting with, which is timescales.
Mm-hmm.
And the media process right now in America does such a great job of distilling us down to the worst things that are happening. The pictures of horrible brutality, the pictures of destruction of property amid the inflammation around the pandemic and around race. And many people have made this point that if you don't widen the view and you don't think about the process the media uses to decide what to feature, and you think about how social media then takes that and even distills it down even further to these crystalline little calamitous nuggets, then you can get lost in that. Some call it doom scrolling.
No, it's like toxic little pills that we imbibe every day off our media. And, that's one of the lessons of walk journalism, because I used to do that. I had great editors. I had fantastic editors. And as we mentioned earlier, you and I were chatting, is that, I've sort of been doing immersive journalism for a long time. We can call it slow journalism. I do, but it's basically immersive. It's going to some place, staying there long enough that you really can get your head and your heart into the issues and draw deeper lessons and deeper connections. But even before I started this project in places like Africa, I also was on the War on Terror beat. Today launched my travels to places like Afghanistan and Iraq. But the propensity to focus on the drama, you can't do that when you're a foot reporter because you can't get to the fires quickly enough. I mean, the metaphor that I use when I talk to students is you're walking through a village or a town, and there might be a house on fire. And by the time you get there on foot, it's out. But you get to cover everything to the fire and away from it, which is actually what, big surprise, it's 98% of human life, right?
Right. Making breakfast, tending to your kids, finding water.
Absolutely. Yeah. The world is by and large, our social media, to the contrary, a fairly peaceful place.
If we can only keep that in mind. I want to show a little clip from I guess you posted this maybe just a week ago from where you are now. I'm not going to show the sound, so you can describe a little bit about what we're.
Yeah, I mean, this is if I recall correctly, this is a piece. Just one of the things you do when you're walking the world as a storyteller, as a reporter, is you literally trip across stories. You trip over them, right? And this is one of those. This is filmed in northern Myanmar. I was walking through communities, noticing, like many people, that the Burmese wear a very pale cosmetic on their face. It's pale yellow. Everybody, men, women, children, old people. And I was curious about what it was, where it comes from. And so I did a story on the kind of this organic cosmetic that's made of ground up tree bark that's quite old. I mean, first historical references go back 600 years. And it's for the people who wear it. This gentleman you're going to watch, he's about to eat it. He's going to eat his face paint, basically, because he thinks it does, internally good things as well as externally good ones. So these are the kind of small stories, micro stories, that can happen every day, often multiple times a day. And do they have big, geopolitical significance? maybe not in isolation, but the beauty of walking for 8 years across, now I think it's 11 or 12,000 miles, about 20 some thousand kilometers, is that you're able to make these connections between micro stories to two larger stories and extrapolate out on the big headlines of our day in ways that people who, like I used to be, were moving much more quickly miss. So this form of observing the world, of listening to the world, because the way I also describe my project, it's like a giant listening tour. It's listening my way across the world in people's homes, in places like where they're manufacturing this bark cosmetic, in roadside stalls, truck stops, refugee camps, war zones, atop of mountains with pastoralists. You make connections that you would never make by driving to these places, by helicoptering, by flying to them, flying to an airport. What you and I maybe used to do in kind of the classical period of, mainstream journalism is you fly to an airport during a crisis, you meet up with a local colleague who's going to be your logistician and your translator, you get into a rent-a-car and you drive to story X. Missing along the way, story A through Y, that may be as important or even more important than story X, but you don't see it because it's a blur, it's a tableau through car windows. Walking slows that process down and allows you to kind of stumble across stories and make connections. I think the biggest gift of this isn't just immersion, it's connectivity. It's finding the interstitial tissue narratively and intellectually between big global issues such as the Earth Institute. I looked at your mission and the things that are of interest to the Earth Institute: water, peace and justice, global health, energy, agriculture, urbanization. Guess what? None of these things exist in isolation. They are braided intricately and inexorably together. And the only way that we can really recover them honestly is to show that they're braided together, that urbanization is tied to conflict, that human health is tied to climate change. Because what we tend to do in our business is put stories into these tidy little boxes that have nice frames around them called environmental journalism or conflict reporting. And guess what? It's bullshit. It's not true, because those borders are artificial constructs predicated by the technology that we use to share them. Walking erodes those artificial frames and shows the connectivity between an environmental story and piracy. I call them kind of diagonal stories, or between education and conflict. I mean, these are stories that are kind of hard to see unless you spend a little time finding those connections.
And is this something you can propagate? I know along the way you've done all kinds of tutorials or co-learning and reporting with journalists. You connect with students all the time. How was that part of your concept from the beginning? I'm going to show the education website so people get the idea.
Yeah, thanks. It was a small component. It was part of the original idea. I was of the opinion, even before I started on this project, that unless we get very young people into the habit of consuming news, of having inquiring, independent minds to know how to choose and pick information and not be isolated into one channel or one medium, we're going, no matter how beautiful and elegant our stories are, no matter how many prizes we give each other, they're not going to read us or they're not going to watch us. So there was always an education component kind of baked in, but it's now grown to be co-equal with the storytelling. We have tremendous education partners. You're showing one of them here, Out of Eden Learn at Harvard, has a independent learning platform that's global, cross-cultural, has, I think, more than 30,000 students across 60 countries. They teach each other. And it's not this superficial thing about what do you have for breakfast in Uzbekistan. It's let's help each other with our writing skills. Let's go out and walk our neighborhoods and slowly talk to people from different generations, compose stories and compare them and make them better, teaching each other. The Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting has created a U.S. curriculum built around the walk storytelling. The National Geographic Education promotes the walk. I mean, I speak to classes across the world through their good graces. So education has become very important. And then the kind of the final fillip on that is that lately, I've even moved into, I guess, what would you call, career development or professional development, and that we're looking at working journalists now, not just students. My colleagues and I did a series of workshops in India where we collaborated with Indian colleagues to produce journalism of the type that comes from slowing down and walking around Mumbai or walking through Kolkata and kind of avoiding the two internet reported stories a day syndrome.
Right.
And actually, but I'm not demeaning the internet reportage. I mean, it's the way of the world. And I'm not
Right.
advocating that my sort of methodology is what everybody should embrace to kind of produce a new renaissance in this. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying it would be good if I were young, if I were 25 again in this biz, to have an ample toolkit. And one of the tools would be immersive reportage, slow journalism.
Right. My kind of take on this started when I went to Greenland to write a big story for the Times on the ice sheet and what's going on with it. And Len Apcar, who was an editor at the time there, who's now I think in Louisiana teaching, maybe it's Loyola. He said, why don't we post some like quick riffs? Let's do like postcards from the Arctic. We kind of had a brainstorm on that. I started doing that. And there were these little mini stories. Like I ran into a guy, had nothing to do with climate change. It was a peregrine falcon researcher who was studying the falcons that nest in the cliffs there. And then they come to North America from Greenland. And I did a little mini story. And there were all these things along the way that were just, and to me, it also gave a bit of a sense of how journalism works. So it was an over the shoulder form of looking at the big story. And then the big story ran, right? So it was like both.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of like rucksack journalism, right? Nomadic journalism. I mean, I'm basically a nomadic news bureau for mostly long form, but I also do small stuff too. And we can talk about that if you wish, but I think the mix is nice. The longitudinal aspect of walking across the world as a methodology is that you've got this amazing time horizon where you, like a scientist, my education as a scientist, I wasn't educated as a reporter, it's a transect. And so you just like somebody who walks a rainforest or a desert and takes a core sample every 2 meters. I'm doing the same with my storytelling. Every 100 miles of displacement, I stop and I do something called a milestone. And it's a systematic, and the systematic part is what's really cool and fun because it's replicable over and over and over again. Ask 3 questions about human identity. Who are you? To the first person I meet. Who are you? Where do you come from? Where are you going? Why do I ask that? Because that's what I get asked about 400 times a day, right? When I'm bought that, people the same question. So it's my turn once every 100 miles to ask that of the first stranger. And the answers, they can be from, I'm from that village, or I come from God, or whatever it is. It's recorded. And then there's a panorama and a video. And these are like little beads on a string on the pathways of the first human discovery of the world, all the way from Africa, the mother continent, to the very last horizon, which is the tip of South America, which is where I'm headed. That's where scientists say is one of the last corners of the world that our ancestors reached, Homo sapiens, about 7,000 years ago. And if we have these little beads, we have basically a family portrait across the world. And it's a pretty cool element. I think this notion of pouring narrative information into maps like this is really fun. Cartographic narratives. We do that a lot. We have a police map of how many times I've been stopped by police. It just goes on and on.
That's a great practice. It feels like a very rigorous thing to kind of hew to as well. Do you have
It's
a
tough.
certain discipline that allows
It's
you
tough.
to do that?
I have actually forgotten to take one because I've been daydreaming and I've had to walk back, at one point.
Oh, that's
I
your
think,
punishment?
yeah, it drives it home. Here's what we're seeing now. This is Jaffa Say, he's my walking partner in northern Myanmar. And that's a typical day. I mean, this is a nice little video to show kind of what life is like on the hoof, stopping at a roadside. This was in a gold mining town, and this was a store that had everything. I mean, 99% of human material culture in the 21st century was in this store. And they were selling it to gold miners. And guess who was making all the money, right? It's always the merchants.
Of course.
But basically, it requires discipline. I mean, I've had to walk back many miles, and I frustratingly, I tell readers, I say, look, this is what I missed, and I had to go back and get.
Amazing. So what was your background in science? And I remember your other Pulitzer Prize was for the Genome Project. Your
Mm-hmm.
big. So, what was your background before you became a journalist?
I was an environmental scientist. My degree from the UC Santa Barbara is in basically a botany heavy background. I was studying, sesquiterpenes and tarweeds for taxonomic studies. I was studying intertidal ecosystems. I was planning to go to Central America under a professor at the time who was doing canopy research in Costa Rica, and very interested in working with a woman named Nalini Nadkarni, who kind of discovered that whole new layer of biome. But as always, I mean, I think we also joked when I first came on that, we both fell into this by accident. Is like I was going to continue my career in that when I got on my motorbike. I supported myself partly through college by commercial fishing, and I was going to go commercial fishing in the Gulf of Mexico, and the bike broke down in New Mexico, and I took a bunch of odd jobs to repair the bike, and one of them was just on a recommendation to go work at the local newspaper, and I didn't know what difference between a dateline and a byline, and I had to be told to dial 9 to get out.
Amazing.
Back in the day when you had to dial.
Right.
And I loved it, and I never went back to science.
That's amazing. Yeah, I got a biology degree and got a fellowship that allowed me to study in the South Pacific for a little while. And
wow.
And then I ended up on a sailboat as
Okay,
crew.
Great.
And
Whereabouts exactly?
from New Zealand to Europe.
Oh my, wow.
So that was my transect, 17,000 miles on a funky sailboat.
That's an epic one. Yeah.
Yeah, but way shorter and a lot less foot miles. But maybe it was part of that's what led me to journalism. It was seeing the world, seeing change, being off the beaten track, feeling a sense of urgency about the wonders, both human and natural, and how do you convey that to the world? I grew up one of those, like, did you see that ... kind of people? Well, did you see that, or did you hear? And that's, I guess, part of what being a journalist is. So,
well, don't you find science being really helpful for being a journalist? I mean, it's that rigor, where you go out into nature, you look for patterns, and you test gathering data, you test your hypothesis, and for us, the data could be interviews or documents. But I found that a scientific background has been very helpful.
Yeah, and I think it gives you, the word rigor comes to mind again, the sense to step back from your own instincts, which is a crucial practice now in the information environment we're all in. And I've clicked on many things over time that I realized, oh no, that wasn't quite what I thought it was, or someone just conned me with a more extreme portrait of what was going on than is actually happening. So maybe we could talk about some of your biggest milestones. Like what were some of the events that really challenged you or just totally blew you away? There's so many, I'm sure that
it's hard. I think it's I can easily pitch some out, but with the caveat that there could be 25 others for each one example that I give. But walking up the Rift Valley, I'd been in Africa for almost a decade, so that was kind of home turf for me in a sense. I was familiar with it, but it was still the ability to do it on foot. We covered about 400 kilometers, my Ethiopian and Djiboutian walking partners and I, and to be walking through like a Pleistocene landscape where there's still very large, lots of large megafauna roaming around. There's still herds of antelope and ostrich, and you could hear predators at night out in the darkness. It was a nice way to start a walk that's trying to connect to memory, right? That's trying to, this is Djibouti, trying to get back into this Pleistocene mindset about what it was like not to have a destination, to be walking through the world before destinations had even been invented, and to have both an open mind and an open heart to that open horizon, something to match the physical world. The sense of wonder. Africa, starting in Africa was magnificent, but also, Andy, in retrospect, really sad, because in the years since, I've never seen anything like that amount of wildlife. And as you know, there's been this recent report about this crash in wildlife populations that just came out. And I've lived it on foot, anecdotally. I was astonished that after leaving Africa, that corner of Africa, because lots of Africa has been really heavily impacted by human development. But basically stepping from basically like a month of walking through a Pleistocene landscape, like the kind that our own Homo sapien ancestors would have felt at home in, then going to Arabia, going under the Arabian Peninsula, where everything has been hunted out, and you're basically walking through deserts that have been stripped of their fauna, where it's rare even to see birds. And it's really sobering, and unfortunately, it's been persistent for the last, I think I've covered 2 continents so far. Maybe if you say subcontinents, maybe 3: Horn of Africa, Arabian, the Levant, and then Eurasia. I can count on the fingers of 2 hands the days of the last, whatever it's been, 2,800 days, where I've seen like megafauna. It's just really rare. And one was Africa, and one was, not surprisingly, some very remote mountains in Central Asia, right, in Afghanistan and Tajikistan. But elsewhere, our thumbprint on the planet is huge, and it's very difficult to get away from our influence. Even in the middle of very notorious deserts like the Kizilkum in Uzbekistan, you'll find blown trash. You might not see the origin, but it's blowing across the landscape.
Amazing. I've just posted a link. I want to make sure teachers and students of any age, meaning anyone who's an inquiring mind, if you want to ask Paul a question live face-to-face right now, you can come on the show. There's a link there, j.mp/Salopek questions. On your computer, you have to have Firefox or Chrome, otherwise it won't work. But other than that, it should work. So for the next half hour, we'll see if anyone wants to come in and say hi. I have more questions, of course. And one of them is about the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So where were you in January? And then how did this play out for you on the road?
I was in Burma. I was in Myanmar already. And it was a bit, the timing was interesting because I'd already paused to finish a book. I've been on the string with an editor to finish a book for years. And I thought I'd stop in Burma. And so a few months into my book pause, the pandemic broke out. And it was one of these interesting questions for those of us kind of nomads who are, moving through the world, always away from home, whatever home may be, is what happens when a global crisis like this hits. Do you go home or do you stay put? And I decided as the window was closing, as airlines are shutting down and borders are going up, health restrictions are going up, to stay in Myanmar. And so it's been a long extension of the book, Leave from the Walk. In that sense, I've had it very lucky. I've not had it anything near as bad as many, many millions, tens of millions of people around the world. And Myanmar at the time, at the very beginning, my friends who were in the public health field and geneticist friends were saying, "Are you sure you really want to stay there? Because it's a country that is struggling with financing the health sector, and you get it, you're pretty much on your own." I was up in the remote north, away from the main big cities. And I decided to risk it on the kind of old, medieval literature that I remembered about Europe, where you kind of go away to the village to try to escape it. And so I thought I'd stay near a food source if the pandemic got really bad. My experience with these kind of things in my career as a foreign correspondent is that food security is the next big thing that really worries you when these pandemics come. And I was worried about insecurity in cities if people started to get hungry, and I didn't want to be caught in the middle of that. So I went to a village where I had friends, and they were at the very kind of beginning of the food chain, food production, rice culture. And I thought I'd help them out on their rice farm and then just kind of wait it out. And people were predicting really large numbers of cases in Myanmar. They were expecting up to millions of people maybe being impacted by it. And what's strange is this thing in Southeast Asia that you might have been reading about, where this phenomenon that's very complicated. I don't think anybody understands. I don't understand it yet, and I'm not an expert, but complicated mix of factors. One of the interesting ones is possible background sort of resistance two wild coronavirus families, because this is where the coronavirus is sort of emanated from, right? Through
Right.
natural reservoirs of bats or civet cats or other creatures. So maybe not for COVID-19, not for this bug, but people might have had some sort of background resistance built up, because right now, even taking into account the numbers in Burma, which are super low because they're just not testing, they don't have the resources to test. The last time I just looked before coming on, it was like 2,200 cases, 16 confirmed deaths for a country of 54 million people. Now, look, Andy, you and I know that how we've done through this before as journalists. You can't hide something like hospitals being packed, or cemeteries blooming. You can't hide that. So, and it's not happening. Now, it is going up now. There's some concern in the last even 2 weeks. It's starting to spike in Myanmar. But until now, it's been really low. So it's this mysterious question of environment, genetic predisposition, the endemicity of the viruses in question. And I think there are geneticists kind of now studying this about, is there some sort of pangolin belt, if you will, of resistance across Southeast Asia?
Well, I'm sure you'll end up writing about it, or David Quammen, I think, is writing a book now.
Yeah, he
he'll be writing it about it for sure.
Yeah.
He is writing a book now. He already said it's interesting. I've gotten to know. Well, Laurie Garrett was one of the early guests on this show. She covered. She wrote the book "The Coming Plague" in 1995.
Oh, terrific.
And now she's, it's terrible to think that you have a moment, but she's been all over this story.
Yeah.
And
We're
Carl Zimmer, another writer.
Yes. No, I mean, we're lucky to have people with this depth of experience. I mean,
yeah,
it's really important to have that kind of data bank to kind of separate all the nonsense from fact-based information.
I'm just posting something here. Hold on, teacher. Oh, there's a question that came in, sort of a comment I thought you might want to respond to.
Sure.
Let me just put that up while I post a tweet. And it is from Katrina Hyun Weiss. Says, I love this concept of slow journalism, and to really capture the wholesomeness of the story. What a humbling experience. In this way, how might this work to help teach others about humility, something many of us could use more of these days? So is there a general practice here, whether you're a journalist or not, that might be transferable to how we go through the day?
Yeah, no, that's a really, Katrina, that's a great point. And it's sort of, you've written kind of the mission statement for that of Eden Walk. It's very humbling to be doing this. I think just the very act of slowing down and taking some time in your life, like once a week, if not once a day, to kind of just pause in the hectic nature of things. I mean, one of the ironies of being in kind of lockdown and being pandemic bound is that, the world slows down, but your mind doesn't. And in fact, probably speeds up. And to find ways to kind of, I use my body, I use walking as a way, but if you can't do that, find a way to slow your thinking down and kind of do observational exercises, even within your home, or really long conversations with people who are not familiar to you, if that's possible, either digitally or safe distancing. But these are the kinds of concepts that we try to impart to young storytellers on our workshops and to even the students we talk to. Our partners say, take a walk around the city block. You don't need to walk across Kazakhstan to make discoveries. You just take a walk in your neighborhood, listen, use all your senses, pause and watch something. Andy, you mentioned as a kid, just watching nature, even is an amazing thing to kind of open up your senses for human interaction even. And then the final note I'll make on this is the part of the humility that has come, one of the kind of nice gifts of the walk is this heightened self-awareness about my own privilege as being a white guy walking around the world. White guy of a certain age, because as you know, in much of the world, this carries a bit of weight. And it's often unearned, right? People describe you being a bit of an elder because you're a whitehead, and I'm just as confused as anybody often. So, walking has made me humble. I hope in ways that I maybe not was as self-aware when I had the privilege of like jetting and like having, on expense account credit cards, just kind of stay wherever I want. And your life is prescribed by one metric, the span of your footstep, and it's a nice leveler. It puts you down on the level with the Burmese farmer. It puts you down on the level with the pastoral nomad pushing goats through eastern Turkey. And if it doesn't make you humble, then I don't know what's going to make you humble.
That's a great point. Everyone has to take a step. Emerson in the 1840s, Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote something about walking that reverberated through me, through Joel Cohen, a demographer. We were talking about resilience, and I was just musing on, I had written a post on my .earth blog about, can we move from a sprint to a marathon pace as a species, how we approach the world. And we were talking about that, and he said, well, Emerson said walking is the act of falling forward without falling down. Every step you take, you're essentially catching yourself in a forward fall. And that feels to me like another benefit, thinking that way. As distinct from sprinting.
Yes.
Which can
act. And there's another very apt Emerson quote that I go back to when it comes to walking and the creative life is, whoever thought the days would be God's? It's this notion of finding wonder and even revelation in the daily, in the everyday, which is really an important aspect of feeding what I do. I mean, and I think it creates joy. I mean, you're generally happier, if not happy, when you're on the move, when you're moving at 3 kilometers an hour. It's sort of, as a former biologist, it's what I tell students is that, walking 24,000 miles across the world is not extreme, because scientists have attached GPS devices to the last few remaining hunter-gatherer communities in the world. There's a group called the Hadza in Tanzania, and they haven't attached the hunter-gatherers have allowed them, scientists, to collaborate with them and have agreed to put GPS devices in their hunting kit, in their shoulder bag. And folks who are hunting and gathering, which is about 90+% of our species history, move about 12 kilometers, 7 miles a day, 7 or 8. Women a little bit less because they're after different things. That's the norm. And if you string together that mileage on an average year, including some rest days, of course, and people aren't walking in linear directions, right? Hunter-gatherers move in circles. They come back to a shelter, come back to a shelter.
Right.
You could be walking more or less roughly from Los Angeles to New York every year. And then the next year you turn around, you walk back to LA. And the next year you turn around, walk. That's normal. And the extreme sport is what you and I are doing now, which is sitting down. This is not what we're designed to do.
Yes, well, I'm an extremist then. Unfortunately, these days, the last few months particularly.
Oh my word! Yes, I know. Yeah.
So in Myanmar, I saw you were up in the snow not long ago. You're getting around while you're there.
No, that was my walking partner. I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah. I was sharing his great happiness in getting out and going up into the Himalayas. I'm more restricted because I'm also writing a book, so I can't really. I'll save these kind of rewards for when the book is done. But it's an extraordinary part of the world. I mean, it's where China and Myanmar and India come together, and it's an area that doesn't get too much attention from outside. So it's an interesting place. Very complicated, very diverse cultural mosaic of ethnicities and languages. A big thing in northern Myanmar is medicinal herbs. It's a big, it supports a lot of people. They make their living off of collecting wild medicinal plants. And yeah, it's got this amazing altitudinal ecological variation going from, cold desert and even snow caps down to tropical rainforest.
Incredible. So how long are you on your book hiatus?
I'm hoping my editor isn't listening to this, but I'm trying to finish it by, say, the end of October. it's a little bit, the book is one big milestone for me, but another is we're still waiting on land borders to open.
Right.
And so when I say we, I mean me and my colleagues. So we're waiting for China to reopen its land borders so that I can walk into Yunnan. That's the next thing. And so I'm hoping, in a few months, a couple months, 2 to 3 months, I'm back on the move. That's the plan. And it'll be a big, gigantic transect through China, 6,000 kilometers. It's going to take 1.5 years through some amazing ecosystems. China is so amazingly diverse. I've never been. This is my first time. And exiting through the Amur River in the north into Siberia, which is, as you know, a major crane flyway, and I'm hoping to time it right to get there when the cranes are coming through.
Do you have family? I can't remember if you're married or.
Yeah, well, I don't have any children, and my family knows me from the beginning, so like there's no big surprise. So when I broached this subject with them, it was just a bit of exaggeration, but like having a conversation over the breakfast table saying, hey, I want to go walk around the world. And then she turns at the page, or, my brothers or sisters turn the page on their newspaper and say, yeah, go right ahead. So
there you go.
It's a family of nomads. I was raised in another culture. With my brothers and sisters, we were raised in Mexico. Crossed my first border at 6. And pretty much have been crossing borders ever since.
And so you would go from Myanmar to China. That would be your.
One route is to go due north, into Yunnan. And then if that border is closed, then I would walk east into Thailand and Laos, and then try crossing into Yunnan through Laos. So walking through the foothills of the Himalayas eastward. The headwaters of the Mekong.
Who else out there has done work that sort of feels resonant with your approach here? Like, is this a truly unique enterprise, or what have you seen that? Well, Bill Bryson, the Appalachian Trail. I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah,
he's not reporting it. He wasn't reporting it as he was going. But what else comes to mind for you?
I'll be cheeky and answer it in 2 ways. I'll say that it's been done by everybody since day one. Because if you go back to the very beginning, the models I'm going on are the wandering Greek bard, or Malian storytellers who would walk from village to village, playing a thumb harp and reciting poetry. And so this notion of combining storytelling with walking goes back to day one. So I'm nothing new. I'm like take a number 4 billion. That said, in terms of using modern technology, so I'm kind of wedding the oldest form of storytelling in the world, which is ambulatory storytelling, with modern reportage and meshing it with social media and whatnot. I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, there's got to be somebody else doing it. There are people walking long distances across the world. There was a guy from Canada who walked, I think, 45,000 miles over 11 years, an astonishing distance. But I'm not sure the mission was the same, right? I'm not sure if we can make a claim to any originality, it's maybe the mission and not so much the physical journey. This is like typical footage from a milestone, right? So this is a glimpse from a milestone in Northeast India, where we just do 60 seconds of kind of observed footage. And you string these together and you get to see the gradations of change in landscape and people. It's nice. It's a nice way to kind of share a foot journey across the world.
And there you're showing, that looks like it's probably a brick kiln.
It is a brick kiln. Yep.
Been there, done that.
Yes.
Such an interesting phenomenon, because I guess the clays are everywhere, and the process of making those bricks goes back a long time. So
it does, and it is excruciating to see the work being done. Yeah, it's tough.
And the pollution, the smoke is pretty. I did a lot of reporting several years ago for ProPublica on sort of household pollution, village pollution, and health, and it's such a challenge. The fuel question. Sorry.
They're trying to convert to gas. I mean, they're trying.
Right. And that's one of the paradoxes or points I brought up in my climate reporting, which is what right does the developed world have to wag a finger at India, say you need to get off fossil fuels, when in fact in many cases a fossil fuel choice like gas or propane at the village LPG is a vastly better alternative than a woman spending 4 hours a day carting wood, preparing a fire, cleaning the sooted pots, and starting all over again.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah. That's another thing, Andy. And you've been around the block as much as I have.
No, not as much as you have.
Well, I'm just taking the slow way.
Right.
Another thing that comes to mind in your anecdote about kind of the virtue signaling at a geopolitical level, it happens among individuals on Twitter, happens among countries too, is another thing that's really been driven home when you approach stories on foot, is you see things where, I guess it would be, you would see even a kind of a conventional foreign correspondent would see the hypocrisy. Of course, you did. But when you're walking it and living it, I mean, you really, you don't really go back to your hotel and you don't go back on your plane. You're there and you wake up to it the next day. And then you wake up to the next day and you stay with another family next week in the same situation. And the iniquities of the world really are very striking. I'm a very privileged nomad, but I spend time with people who are not privileged, and these kind of outside solutions that come in, the outside judgments, and
Right.
it's very difficult. I mean, it's everything from environmental issues to animal rights to sensitive issues on gender. I mean, things get very human in a complicated way very fast when you're on foot. Yeah, there you go.
I'm showing some footage I shot in Faltan, a town in central
What do they
India.
got there? What is she using for fuel there?
That's a water heater, and it's wood.
Okay. Okay.
Let me see. It's kind of stalling. Yeah, and then over in the back, they're cooking breakfast also on biomass. Now, the good news is it's not inside the house, obviously, because
Yes, that's good
often
for
that
health. Yeah,
similar
hardly.
fire would be inside the house.
Yeah.
The bad news is it's an extraordinary amount of biomass of particulate pollution.
Yeah.
And in India, they've estimated that 1/3 of the outdoor air pollution is from biomass.
Oh, really?
Burning
Wow.
fields.
Yes. Yeah.
Burning fuels like that. So it's a big part of what we sometimes simplistically think of as a fossil fuel problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Right.
guess that's part of what you're talking about. The getting past the caricatures is an important part of.
Finding these oblique connections, because I don't know about you, it's easy to go out with kind of a square idea, but the cool story, the important one, is often the diagonal one that connects the corners that you don't think.
Right.
So
if you
Go ahead.
if you had to choose, and this is silly in some ways, of course, between the book product at the end of this, or the books, and the journal part, connecting with people in a sequential way through blog-like postings and would you feel wistful about one or the other? I guess I'm saying
Yeah. One is it's primarily a sedentary. Writing a book is it's really hard, Andy. It's really hard because I'm not used to it, and it requires more discipline for me to sit down at a table and a desk every day, day after day, week after week, month after month, than it does to walk across Eurasia. Walking across Eurasia is mighty easy, at least for me. It's pretty natural. It's exhilarating. You wake up in the morning and I have people ask me, students sometimes, isn't it boring? I mean, you're just kind of walking across the steppes of Uzbekistan. I'm saying, are you kidding? There are no 2 days alike, and there are no two problems that are similar. And you go into this very primal problem solving mode where it's up to you. You have to get through it. There's no police department or fire department standing by. And that is exhilarating in the sense that it gives you confidence in your body. but it also gives you confidence in the skill sets that you're carrying around in your mind. And it's a lovely, it's an empowering thing to walk across the world, and endlessly fascinating. You know, people say, "Aren't you getting tired of it?" And I say, "No, I reserve the right to grow tired of it and stop." But it's not happened yet, not by a long shot.
That's funny. And obviously, well, when you were at the Tribune or your early days, was photography a part of what you did? Or
No, I held photography in contempt. Like a lot of people, you know, back of my day, writers. And today, it's proven to be, no pun intended, an eye-opening experience for me as a writer, because I'm shooting everything on a phone. The entire project now is in my pocket visually. Video recordings, audio recordings, still images. I'm not making any great claims to the quality of it, but it captures a dimension of the experience and of the emotional experience that I think at some moments it's better than the writing. So it's fun. It's fun. And it's interesting too to know that, I mean, I don't know what the latest statistic is, how many billions of mobile phones now. I think there are at least as many as human beings on the planet.
yeah,
So you can be in the remotest Afghanistan, a place that has no roads, that has no mobile connection, and you'll still have ethnic Kyrgyz pastoralists, yak pastoralists carrying mobile phones just to take pictures, so that when they do drive their yaks to market, they can then download them, you know, and share them. And it's so the world is extraordinarily wired. Yeah, it's astonishing. That's another thing that I found out on foot is when I started the walk in 2015, I did a little superficial homework. Something like 37% of the world was wired together just 8 years ago through mobile technology. By the time I finish, it's going to be over 90. And that kind of revolution, if anybody tells you how that's going to change us, I would call them a charlatan, because I have no idea. That kind of collective unconscious, that network, that grid of minds, I have no idea how it's going to affect us.
there's someone has used the term omnivalence. It's like surveillance. Or surveillance means from the top, looking down.
Yes.
Omnivalence is in every direction. And as one reason I've come to Columbia, remember, I'm not at the journalism school, I'm at the Earth Institute, is because I feel it's essentially a new element of the Earth system. The information system that we now have is a fundamentally new component of the Earth system, especially in the Anthropocene, when we are, as you said, diminishing wildlife, changing climate. We're changing the information flows that change our behavior. And if we're not thinking about that as a frontier, then
beyond the troposphere is what would we call it, the data sphere that is now all developing, right? And so it really is amazing. I mean, this image that you're stopping, that's a great anecdote, because these folks are Afar pastoralists, and they were using mobile technology. When I was walking through, Ethiopia's grid was growing at 400% a year.
Wow.
And it had just reached out to these folks, and it was fantastic for them, because before they were locked into selling to their animals to buyers who had monopolies and who kept them super poor. And by having that device, they could shop around, and it completely broke generations old monopolies, and it made their lives better. So, you know, this notion of it being a tool and that it has no value judgment, good or bad, this is one example of many, right?
Yeah, one of the early examples I heard that was like that was Sri Lankan fishermen. When they were out, while they were out at sea, offshore, they could know which wharf to go to, based on the pricing. So the pricing became clearer. Same thing with the African farmers and corn prices and the like. So it's a leveler, just as it is for everybody. You think of Amazon.com, you know which is the best price, the best review. It's being co-opted terribly right now. You know, these systems are designed to divide us, confuse us.
Yes.
And that's part of the frontier aspect, and figuring out how to navigate that feels like an important part of how we go forward. This has been fantastic. So Alan Mayerson says, if Paul can see this, sending you hugs, old friend.
I send them back. He's a fellow journeyer. Yes, Alan, another storyteller.
Yeah.
And that's been nice too. This technology, like speaking to Alan, who lives in the Washington D.C. area. Again, I have, I consider him a fellow walker in spirit, and I have walked physically with, I don't know, 60 walking partners. I'm serious about who I walk with, and I'm in touch with all of them. They're like family now. You ask how's my family feel about it? Well, which one? The one in Saudi, the Saudi retired special forces general, or the Turkish poet, or the 19-year-old high school student from Georgia. My goal, just to wrap this up, I know we're coming up on the hour, is I want to gather all these folks up who walked with me across this planet, this amazing, beautiful planet, stressed planet, the only planet that we have to call home. When I start getting close to Tierra del Fuego, I want to find some philanthropist who's going to help me buy them all airline tickets and fly them all to the end, and we're going to walk together. There'll probably be hundreds of us, the last few kilometers to the Beagle Channel. And it'll be, because the journey belongs to them. That's the fact. I'm sort of along for the ride on my own walk. I see the world through the eyes and the hearts of my walking partners.
So Alan had a question here. I'm not sure where this refers to in our chat, but he says, which loss, which people, and especially what country? I can't quite remember what he would be alluding to. That was from a couple of minutes ago.
But yeah, I'm not sure either, actually.
Maybe Paul, if you can come into the studio briefly. I posted a link on Twitter. Did I say Paul? I meant Alan. There was one other thing I wanted to allude to before we close, which might be another way to think about the culmination of what you're doing. I was talking about this recently in a conversation on this webcast with friends from various parts of the world. Well, you see there also Scott Wallace from National Geographic. I don't know if you remember that. And a Guyanese indigenous representative. And I was talking about the media historically have been storytellers. And I think we're at a point now where what's more valuable is story sharing, or facilitating story sharing. And I had this thought. There's this thing called radio.garden. I'll just go to the link and you'll see it. Radio.garden. Okay. It's radio.garden. And what it is a scrolling map of the world. Here we go. And every dot you see is any digital radio station on the planet with a signal. Wow. Is there, and you can go wherever you want.
And just listen in, or
listen to the news, or to the pop music. And I've been toying with the idea of, I had called it moving voices because it was initially thinking about people on the move, migrants. Yeah. There's no reason now with the, hold on, I have to.
Are we listening to some station now?
Yeah, I don't have it set right now so you can hear it. But you can hear those. I could actually do it. You know what? I'm gonna hold on a second.
Yeah, crank her up.
It's too loud, but there, I can hear it, and it was blocking my ears.
Okay.
I might cut back to it in a second if I can set it up in time. If you had a radio.garden that was like StoryCorps. StoryCorps is where people record stories. Yeah. And so the walkers you talked about, all of those walks and talks and observations can be mapped in a global way that could be then allow students anywhere to share stories, connect with each other, do their slow walks around their communities.
100%. I mean, that's exactly, Andy, you're putting your finger on where we're headed. I mean, I'd love to talk to you, sidebar conversation about your ideas, but this has long since stopped being my walk. And that's been one of the other great evolutions over the past years, is that the people I walk with in particular, I'll continue telling my stories. These are, that's what I'm here. I'm out walking. I have a story to tell too, but the people that I walk with have a significantly more nuanced and informed story to tell about the landscapes that they call home. And here's the added kind of layer of complexity and beauty. It's home, but they too.
Sorry. Now we'll be able to listen. We'll close out with music. It's a little loud. I can't figure out how to turn it down. Oh, there we go. So
Where are we listening to right now?
This is, I think, in Poland. Oh, it's Poland, yeah.
Okay. All right.
But we can scroll anywhere. I'm going to back out a little bit here so we can see a little bit.
Dopiero po remoncie budynek Domu Kultury w
It
Limanowej
reminds me when I was a
zniszczony
kid,
przez Wandę.
sitting with our ham radio that my dad had and just listening to the world.
Yeah.
But now it can be bidirectional, omnidirectional.
All right.
So Paul
you're gonna
Salopek,
get great touching base with you, and I'll
You
check
too.
into this website. I'll get a good dose of global '80s pop, I'm sure.
yeah,
but-
there's a lot of that, but there's also traditional music and all kinds of other stuff out there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul Salopek, for being part of today's Sustain What conversation. The Friday shows are always about the media, social media, communication, innovation. We're now listening to radio somewhere in the far north of the former Soviet Union, I believe. And the idea we might pursue is having a global mapped set of voices, people sharing and ideas, as you have been doing now
In a linear
for a
fashion,
number
yeah,
of
yeah.
years on your walks.
Yeah. Great idea.
So this is the Sustain What? It's an enterprise of Columbia University's Earth Institute initiative on communication and sustainability. I thank Columbia for supporting this little adventure and exploring how to make information matter. And Paul Salopek, Out of Eden Walk, National Geographic, fantastic writer and chronicler, and keep at it and maybe we can do this periodically, touch back with you and see how things are going.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's make it a systematic waypoint along the way. So
Yeah, right. Not every 100 miles, but maybe every 500. Thank you,
Yeah.
Paul. Thank you,
Sounds
Paul
good,
Salopek.
Andy. Great.
Good to
Appreciate
talk with
it.
you.
Likewise. Cheers.
Bye-bye.